All right, welcome to technical session number 20. So we're going to be talking about SOHO routers. Those of you that are curious, SOHO stands for small office, home office. It's typically something we would see in our houses on a regular basis. Our objectives for this particular course or technical session are going to be discussing, comparing and contrasting the different ways in which we can connect to the internet. There's a pretty good variety of them, and we're going to be talking about each one to a degree, going over it. We're going to be comparing and contrasting Wi-Fi networking standards and encryption types. So we're going to start working into the encryption world just a little bit on that. We're going to explain the role of a router and talk a little bit about the differences between a wired and wireless router. We're also going to briefly talk about how to describe or talk about how to install and configure and deploy SOHO routers, some of the common pitfalls you might come across, some of the common problems that come up with SOHO routers, and describe how to solve those problems. BSMs we want to keep in mind: communication. As we know, IT is a team sport. Communication is key when working with our team members, handing off tickets if we're, midway working through them when it's time for us, our shift to be over. Communicating with customers so that they understand, or we understand what their needs are, and they understand the timelines and what to expect with regards to the process and working on their systems. And also, as with any type of troubleshooting or problem solving, one of the biggest factors that can determine success or failure is persistence or grit. Making sure we don't give up. We continually move towards those goals. Try to find that solution. Keep moving forward on that solution. But first, we need to describe what exactly the internet is. Stephen, can you please read for us real quick?
Yeah, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, the internet is a global system of networks that links billions of computers for communicating, sharing information, and resources. It consists of millions of private, public, academic, business, and government networks linked by a broad array of electronic, wireless, and optical networking technologies. Physically, the internet is a huge TCP/IP-based network, physical mesh topology, and traffic passing through a complex system of routers.
Excellent, thank you. So physical mesh, that one comes up again. What exactly did physical mesh look like? Just kind of a brief description, anybody?
All the computers are connected in some way.
Yep, we're knocking on the right door there. A bunch of wires. There we go, Oscar. Perfect. Looks like a spaghetti bowl. Hopefully not. Every node is connected to every other node, right? There's no one single path to get from A to B. There are usually multiple paths to get there. In a smaller network, if you have 10 computers, each computer would be connected to every single other computer. And that basically is what the internet as a whole looks like, with the routers for the most part being your nodes that facilitate that communication. So types of internet connections that can be established. You have two basic camps. You have your wired versus your wireless. Wired, dial-up. You're sitting there thinking, do people still use dial-up? Yes. There are still some communities where that is the best option you can have. It also works as a backup system in a lot of places as well. You can set up a backup system if you have if you still have a hard line connected to your house or what have you. You can establish a backup internet connection. If your main internet goes down, that one can pick up the slack from there. ISDN, or Integrated Services Digital Network, DSL, the digital subscriber line, cable TV, which is hands down the most popular at the moment, and fiber optic, which is the most coveted at the moment. Then we get over to our wireless, where we have satellite, cellular. 4G is currently the dominant factor, but we are evolving into the 5th generation as we speak, and that can change a whole lot of things with regards to internet connectivity with speeds and capabilities. And then we have WiMAX, Wi-Fi, and then we also have tethering. First, dial-up connections utilizing POTS, plain old telephone service. Are any of y'all old enough to remember where your computer had to scream for about a minute or two before it could actually communicate with the internet?
I was just about to say the noise still haunts me.
Yeah. So you actually heard the phone tone, and then it would dial, and then you hear the and it would go on for a minute or so. I actually had a relative who had cockatiels, and the cockatiels would dial up the internet. Like, they would make those sounds all the time because they would hear it so often. And we would remind them, please do not ever will those birds to us. But
Oh wait, the birds were like
would
that was,
duplicate the sound.
oh, that had to be annoying. There were two
Yeah.
of them.
Multiples. It was like 5 or 6 of them. But they would make the dial tone, and then then they would do the beeps, and then they would do the screeching at the end.
Oh no.
So yeah.
Alrighty.
You should have taken them to the payphones.
I know, right?
Phones.
Yeah, where you could record it, like the old school payphones, where you could actually record the tones and then play it back, and then the payphone would think it received money. It was an old school one. That was like 80s level, wasn't it? Or it was late 80s. I think they fixed it in the mid 90s. But so POTS, least expensive, hands down the slowest. I think the maximum speed we could get was 56K or 56 kilobits. So it's not even 1 megabyte. And you had fun things like it would take an hour to download a single image. So like one picture could take you over an hour to download it. The uses for it, like where you might see it when you're traveling, you know, depending on where you go, a backup system, or if, you know, you need to cut your budget somewhere and bandwidth is not a major component of your business, that would be a way to do it. How it connects utilizes the old RJ11 jacks. If you remember, those are these square connectors for the old school phone lines. It does utilize twisted pair cabling to reduce the crosstalk, but only 4 wires, or up to 4 wires. Some of them only use 2. So up to 4 wires. And it is not the same technology as DSL. That is a little different. Yeah, MP3s, that could take a whole day. But who's asking a question? Nope. All right. So that is POTS. Then we have ISDN, or Integrated Services Digital Network. And it was a digital telephone technology that supported multiple 64 kilobits per second channels. on a single connection, which was nice. Had the capability of carrying voice, digital, and data. And it utilized an RJ45, which is the more modern connector we see, the rectangular one, that can have up to 8 pins, and a modem that was called a terminal adapter. And they had 2 types of circuits. They had a basic rate interface, or PRI, or a primary rate interface, PRI. So, some other ones, we have DSL, which operates off of the old school phone line, provide high data speed transmission over the existing wires, which was really good. They had a few different variants that can differ in your data rates. And the thing was, which was nice, you could use your phone line and this at the same time. Remember the old school dial-up? If somebody was on the internet, you couldn't use the phone at all. This allowed both. And what it did was it actually kind of changed how the telephones worked permanently. It kind of lowered the range of a voice. So like when you actually hear someone's voice over the phone, you're not actually hearing the full range of their voice. They lowered that range so that they could send digital over the upper and lower pieces of that range, which was kind of neat. Now, data usage was broken up either into asynchronous or synchronous data usage. So you have an asynchronous data subscriber line and synchronous data digital subscriber line. Does anybody know what the difference, based on the name, what would you assume the difference was in these two? Somebody wants to take a guess. Nobody wants to guess?
Oh, okay. One is
Coaxial cable?
SIM.
Wait, what were we saying, Joyce?
The coaxial cable was the difference?
No, well, this actually comes over an old school phone line, but they have the asynchronous versus synchronous. What were you saying, Greg?
Okay. So a lot of providers, they provide sorry, I got a lot of stuff this morning.
No worries.
But
Get a lot of feedback.
same up and down. Yeah. Sorry about that. My phone's still out.
There we go. There we go. Both, yeah, same speed both ways. That would be synchronous, right? So if you have synchronous data, it means your download speed and your upload speed are the exact same. Asynchronous means one of those is greater than the other. What kind of data do you think you have at your house, Stephanie? Do you think you have asynchronous where both are the same, or do you think you have, or excuse me, you have synchronous where they're both the same, or asynchronous where one is stronger than the other?
I might have the same.
You think it's the same? So you think your download speed is as fast as your upload speed?
No, they different.
No, they're different.
Yeah, they different. Mhm.
How different?
I think the upload speed faster.
Think the upload speed's faster? Okay. Shamika, you think the data stream at your house, is it synchronous or asynchronous?
Synchronous?
You think it's synchronous, so it's both the same, your download and your upload speeds are the same?
Yeah. I
Okay.
think so.
Okay. Bernard, your data rates at your house, do you think you have synchronous or asynchronous?
Synchronous,
Synchronous, so you think your download and your upload are the same?
roughly about.
Okay. That is a common belief, that they believe the rates in which you download are about the same as your rates you upload. In actuality, it's usually like a 90-10 ratio or an 80-20 ratio at best. So your download speeds are going to be way higher than your upload, because we're downloading from Netflix, we're going on and we're shopping on Amazon, we're playing video games, we're watching live TV, all of that fun stuff takes up bandwidth. So we're pulling a whole bunch down to us. So our download speeds, you may see something along the lines of where you may have 200 to 300 megabits per second down. So where you're pulling all of this stuff down to you. And then your upload speeds may be like 24 to 30 megabits per second up. Because we're not really pushing a whole lot of data up into the internet. We are kind of a little bit now where we have, we're in a classroom where we're sending video and voice and all that stuff up to the internet right now, but even that isn't a whole lot in comparison to what we're pulling down. So predominantly, you will see asynchronous data because they want stronger downloads and not as much information going up. Now, if it's a big corporation, they may want synchronous, especially if they have a lot of internet traffic. They may want that. Some may want asynchronous the other way, where they're uploading faster than they download. Depends on your needs. But that's what they mean by ADSL and SDSL with regards to digital subscriber line. Synchronous, it's the same both ways. Asynchronous means one is stronger than the other. So you have synchronous data, Oscar?
I think it's just that the way, but yeah, it's mostly a lot of businesses. Whenever I only learned that when I was doing business stuff, but the businesses seem to be the only ones getting that right off the bat.
Okay, interesting.
When they buy MPLS or some of those dedicated services, they get sync.
Nice. All right, so DSL, much the way DSL utilized existing phone lines, so infrastructure already in place, they found a way to kind of improve upon it, but utilize that same infrastructure that's already been laid out. Cable internet did the exact same thing utilizing coaxial cable. So we use our cable companies now to push data over these lines. So you're using the existing infrastructure, it's already in place. It's always connected, always up, unlike a phone line where you would have to reconnect to it on a pretty regular basis. So it's always up. It can push TV signals and PC data signals through the same coaxial cable. And then it utilizes a cable modem, which converts that signal into a digital signal. So it takes an analog signal from the cable and then converts that into a digital signal that the PC can use. All right. Fiber optic gets us away from the copper lines, utilizing light now. So we don't have to worry about the electromagnetic interference or radio frequency interference. Downfalls, no real line sharing. It's very expensive to lay. And oh boy, goodness help you if you ever break one. Back in the late 90s, if you broke a fiber optic line back then, so this is over 20 years ago, you broke a fiber optic line, it would cost you $2,000 a minute until that line was back up and running. So if you're a construction company and you were digging and you accidentally broke a fiber optic line, it started costing you $2,000 a minute until that line was repaired. So here's my question. How much would you be willing to pay a fiber optic repair technician to come out there and fix that line?
A lot.
A lot. Fiber optic techs, even today, make a good amount of money based off of stuff like this. Because wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if it's not a critical situation and a situation like this comes up, you got to drop what you're doing right then and there, go fix that line. And they are going to be more than willing to shell out money to you to come if you're getting charged around $2,000 a minute to get that repair.
Hey, I seen that line break, and I'm telling you, like, I was involved in a little bit of that, and I saw how crazy it is to even track it. It's insane. They deserve every single dollar, man. Because just remember, when you break that fiber, you have to basically now try to address each line. Like, you know, you have to find out where that line is going, and it's hard to do because the other side of it is not sending you any data.
No,
this is crazy. They deserve every dollar.
But they make big money. And so yeah. But fiber optic can be one of two main flavors. You have your single mode, which is what you would typically use for long haul. And then you have your short haul, which would be multi-mode, or they would use multiple signals through the same line. And this can do pretty much everything. You can do television, data, voice, all that stuff over the same line. All right, now we move into wireless. We get into satellite. So satellite connection is an option if you're like out away from the cities, and you do not have the option to run cable or phone or Ethernet up to your house, because that can be extremely expensive to run, like a fiber optic line or a high-speed internet line to your house if you're not close to one of their nodes. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars just to get the line in. So satellite is a pretty viable option at that point. There you go, Oscar. A lot of people in Puerto Rico have satellite. You get around 125 megabits per second down, but only 3 megabits per second up. But there are some major problems with satellite. The two biggest being it is extremely sensitive to weather, so clouds. If you have foliage like tree covering, stuff like that, it can block the signals. And then the other main one is it has a lot of issues with latency or delay. So we had a TA that I started with that had satellite internet, and there was always a 2 to 3 second delay. I think I told you guys a story. So if ever somebody told a joke, it would always be like everybody would laugh and move on, and then you'd see the joke finally hit him, and then he would start laughing after everybody stopped. So it was kind of funny. But
that's
you know,
funny.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is pretty funny, but you know, like, so for things where you need that really quick reaction, it doesn't work really well. So like voice over IP, you know, when you're talking to somebody on the phone, you don't want to wait 2 to 3 seconds for every response. This situation where we're in a live learning environment, it doesn't work really well. Gaming, it really doesn't work really well. You know, so things like that, it doesn't really flow with. Now, this is not taking into account Starlink, which is kind of coming online now. Time will tell if it lives up to the claims it's making. You know, we're talking 300 megabits per second down. I think it's like 24 to 30 up, and low to no latency. Time will tell when more people get online if it lives up to its name or lives up to its claims. We'll see. If it does, it could be a game changer. But again, a lot of companies come out right off the bat and say, we're the best thing since sliced bread. We can do all of these things. And then when the volume spins up on it, they're not unable to maintain. Yes, Golly.
No, I was just gonna say, also add to that is like when So it's very funny also, like when like you're watching the news and then it's like the same thing that happened when like the host finished saying something and you see
Oh,
the
perfect
person on the
example.
other side. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
just like waiting for at least like 2 minutes and they're just standing there just waiting for the communication to get to them.
Yes, and that's a perfect example of that. Like when they'll ask a question to the field reporter, and the field reporter's like standing there for like a minute, and there's that
Yeah, so
uncomfortable silence, you know, and then they're finally like, "Oh yeah, okay," you know, because you're waiting for the signal to get to them to respond, and then the signal to get back to you. So it takes a while. But
yeah, that's pretty funny.
yeah,
I always laugh at that.
I hadn't heard about them
I
losing
always
satellites. But the benefit that Starlink has is they're sending stuff up into the space station all the time, so they can always launch new satellites, and they have that direct link to another company. So that will be interesting to see how they correct for that and what kind of shielding they'll start adding to their satellites. Curious. I will have to look at that article. Thank you, Oscar. All right, other wireless communications. We want to talk about cellular. This is such a big one because we use it on a daily basis. Big players in the field, Verizon, AT&T, Xfinity, etc. This has evolved over several generations. That's where that G comes in. 4G does not mean data speeds. That is specifically referring to the generation of phone you're using. So certain technologies have to be in place for them to be considered 4G. We're just in the rollout now of 5G, where certain areas are starting to see it. And it has the potential capacity for about 10 gigabits per second with very low latency. And in the data world, that can be a massive game changer, especially for rural communities and stuff like that, when you have a lot of limitations with regards to options for other data or for other internet. You don't really need to know much about the 1 through 3G, just understanding that is a generational growth. 4G, when the LTE comes in, that stands for long-term evolution, meaning the technology is growing and developing over time. In theory, it can get up to 300 megabits per second, although that you would probably have to be standing, you know, in clear line of sight of a tower with everybody in the entire, you know, area with their phone off, you know, for you to possibly be able to achieve that. I've never achieved anywhere close to that. I've gotten up about probably just over 100 at one point, you know, but nowhere near 300. That's not to say we haven't come a long way, you know, but we have. So, and you should receive close to 75 megabits per second uploading, which is pretty nice. I wish this graphic was also in the introduction to the networking one. I might have to add that slide and just remove the wireless portion of it, because this really gives you kind of a good visual representation of the different networks we're talking about. So you have your PAN, which is that personal area network. Go a little bit bigger into a LAN, a little bit bigger, excuse me, into a MAN, and then finally into a WAN, which is our wide area network. But this is a kind of a good one because it breaks everything down based upon the technologies we use at each level. Questions so far? And the 802.20.16.11.15, what each of those mean. For A+, you do not need to know what each of those mean, with the sole exception of 802.11. That one you do need to know what it is. That is Wi-Fi standards. We're about to break that down into smaller chunks so that you can see the different evolutions or flavors of Wi-Fi technology that we have currently. So, questions on this? All right. One last one. Well, not last one, but another one is tethering. They may also call this a mobile hotspot. And depending on your service provider, you may or may not have access to this. Something typically you would ask them to turn on. And this would allow you to share your cellular data with other devices like your computer or, you know, gaming devices or things like that. Old school, they used to actually plug your phone into your computer and it would share the connection. And it was such an awesome technology up until the point in which you received a phone call. And then it would cut off your internet and use the data for your phone call. But mobile hotspot is essentially about the same thing as tethering, though if they are typically offering you both and it's like a matching thing, tethering would typically be viewed as a line connection from your phone to your hotspot. Although there are some security issues with mobile hotspots, we will get into that here in a little bit. Questions so far? All right. So we briefly mentioned this before, the IEEE, which is the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Basically what they do is they set or finalize the standards of the technology that we're using. So you could go in and there is a whole group, it's like 100 different ones of 802 standards for networks. So you have the logical link control, which is 802.2, CSMA/CD, Ethernet LAN standards, that's 802.3, token ring, and so on and so on and so on. But for our purposes, we are predominantly focused on the IEEE 802.11, which is the wireless LAN settings. This is essentially like a big 3-ring binder, and it has all the things about this technology, what makes up this technology, what qualifies this technology, what are its strengths, weaknesses, limitations, all that kind of fun stuff. All right, so LAN standards. Ethernet is hands down the most popular standard. That is the, what kind of connector do we use for Ethernet?
RJ45.
RJ45, that rectangular connector. So that is the typical, we would use shielded or unshielded twisted pair cabling, RJ45 connectors. The most popular kind you will see will be a star bus configuration for physical topologies. And this can be a wired or wireless technology, and it can use either copper wire or Wi-Fi. All right. So here are the various forms of the wireless or wired Ethernet. Remember what we talked about before, where you had this number in the beginning, that's your gigabits per second, or your megabits per second, excuse me. So if you see a 10, it's very slow. And then we finally get up to thin net, thick net, which is a coaxial standard. Then you have fast Ethernet, which is 100 base. Gigabit is 1000, because 1024 equals 1 gigabit. And then you have FL and X, which gets you, I believe, FL and X, are those fiber, I believe? Maybe wrong, I'll have to double check this. A lot of those to remember, unfortunately. And then wireless, which are going to be the main ones, which we are going to get into. And the different versions we need to be aware of. At this time, there are more that have come out since then, but those will be 1102 standard or 1101 standards. We need to know about A, B, G, N, and AC, which are all the different kinds of wireless 802.11 we need to know about. Questions so far? All right. We'll get in a little bit more into the 802.11 stuff here in just a little bit. So wired connections, we see copper cable, which is coax, which is POTS phone lines, which is Ethernet, which is the 802, the shielded twisted pair, the RJ45s. And in under fiber optic, you can have SMF, which is single mode fiber, or MMF, which is multi-mode fiber. Again, on the wireless side, we have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and infrared. Although infrared is a legacy technology that is pretty much just going away, it still has some limited use currently. Although even in its biggest market of remote controls, even those are converting more to Bluetooth technology rather than infrared. All right. Let's see here. Yuki, can you read for us, please?
Wi-Fi characteristics, wireless Ethernet, Wi-Fi. Wireless Ethernet networks use radio waves to communicate. The wireless networks used today are based on the IEEE 802.11 Ethernet standard marketed as Wi-Fi. Wireless networking is the area of networking with fastest ascent over the last years. Understanding Wi-Fi characteristics and installation/configuration is essential for every network technician and/or administrator.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we can all agree that Wi-Fi, of all the technologies, has become the most widely adopted and rapidly advancing over the last 10, 15 years, right? Roll it back to 2005. We weren't even really using Wi-Fi that much. Everything was still more prominently wired connections with regards to our home. Now, as long as you have a good router, maybe a mesh network set up, wireless connections are minimal, if any. I mean, does anybody have wired connections still set up in their house outside of their router? Like the internet comes into their router, do they still have wires coming out of that to other devices?
You don't see.
Okay. Oscar does, Greg does, I do, but it's for very specific reasons. But predominantly, people don't. Once it goes into their Wi-Fi, they make sure it's centrally located. That's it, everything connects to it wireless. So, predominantly, Wi-Fi operates off of two different bandwidths. You have the 2.4 gigahertz range, and you have the 5 gigahertz range. Within each of these, there are specific channels which you can use and allow your devices to operate. And to avoid interference from other nearby wireless access points, this is a big one if you live in apartments, if you office buildings, things like that, we can't all be on the same channel, because if we are, then crosstalk starts to happen, right? It interferes with our signals. This is less of an issue on 5 gigahertz, but this is a pretty big issue with regards to 2.4. 2.4 only allows for 14 total channels. Within these, there are only 3 channels that you should operate on that would guarantee 0 overlap with other channels. Channels 1, 6, and 11. You need to commit those to memory. With a 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth, operating on channels 1, 6, and 11 can pretty much guarantee there's no overlap with other channels. And if you place them properly and utilize them properly, you will not have interference. You can lay out an entire grid utilizing these 3, even in 3 dimensions where you do not have overlap. Problems come in when people think they're getting creative. Like my old mentor, Diego, had a neighbor that set his Wi-Fi on channel 3, which overlapped with channels 1 and 6. So basically killed 2 channels for everybody around them just because they thought, you know, oh, I'll just move to 3. So yes, yes.
Is it possible you can explain this like in real world terms? I know you just use 3. So like, is this like when we all have our different like, what is it called? You know how you have your Wi-Fi name? Is this what this is referring to?
No, this would not be your Wi-Fi name, but when you're setting up your router, when you go in and look at your router settings, it's going to give you channel options.
Okay.
Many times this is auto selected, like it will scan the area around it when it's picking up, and it will pick up the one that it's not being hit with, or the one that has the most, you know, clarity or whatever. So kind of how it looks is, so I create a channel 1 bubble. My next door neighbor to me is able to create a 3, and even though our signals overlap, there won't be any interference because we're operating on different channels. I could also have a neighbor next to me with 6, or excuse me, 11, sorry. And this is 6. Apologies. So 6 wouldn't overlap with 1. 11 wouldn't overlap with either 1 or 6. But say I could have another neighbor on the other side of this one with the channel 1, and even though it overlaps with them, I'm not interfering with the first person.
Oh, okay. And you said it's 14 people can be on one channel, right?
No, no, no. There are a total of 14 channels.
Oh, okay, okay.
So there's 14 channels, but the only channels that you could utilize without having any overlap would be 1, 6, and 11.
Okay.
So those are the predominant channels you would use on the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth, 1, 6, and 11. And a lot of routers will only give you those options. They'll say basically you'll give you a drop down menu. You can choose 1, 6, or 11. Exactly, yes. 2.4 has better wall penetration. There's less refraction as it's going through the walls. And it has a smaller wavelength. So it's not interfered with by the studs as much. Even if you have metal studs, it's less affected. 5 gigahertz has a much wider wavelength. And so it is interfered with by walls much more readily and things like that. But it also has a faster throughput closer to the router itself. So you can push more data over 5, but it's interfered with easier with physical obstruction. 2.4, less interfered with, but the data rates are lower. So you get to kind of pick your battles, which is why most routers today do both. Yes, Scally.
So when you say like the not overlapping channel 1, 6, 11, is that like in a household, or that's like in a whole area where, like you said, like everybody, like, you know, one neighbor will be on 1, somebody else will be on 6, or is it just like in your household where everybody?
No, your household would pretty much all operate off of like 1.
Oh, okay.
But this would be like
So
if you're in an apartment building where you would have a 1, your next door neighbor would likely be on like 11, and then the other person would be on 6, and then the next person after that would be on 1.
and that's something you can like change yourself. Like people can just go and change that themselves, or like you said,
Yeah,
it's like
you can
the
change it
routers and
yourself,
stuff.
but a lot of times it auto selects, or your internet service provider will set it up when they come and put the modem in your house.
Okay. Thank you.
But yes, you absolutely can go in there and change it yourself. All right. Questions so far on this? 3 channels to remember, 2.4 gigahertz, 1, 6, and 11. I know I'm repeating this to death, but it is important.
Just remember the gas station. That's how I remember that one. Or that
The gas.
Yeah, 7-Eleven. 1 + 6, 11.
Oh, okay.
7-Eleven.
Yeah, that works. All right. So let's talk about 802.11 standards. (802.11a) went to speeds as high as 54 megabits per second. And then they operated off of the 5 gigahertz bandwidth. So out the gate, 54 megabits per second, 5 gigahertz bandwidth. 802.11b, only 11 megabits per second, but it operated off of the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth. Yes, Golly.
Yeah, sorry. I just had another quick question, kind of off to the side. So if you have a device like you said with the routers, like some routers offer like both bandwidth, like the 2.4 and the 5. So if you like introduce another device to that, right? Like you know how the routers separate both, channels. So if you introduce another, like I said, I guess access point or something like that, that have both in there, would it cancel the other channel, like the 2.4? Like, I don't know.
If you're running them on the same channel, you would have a high level of interference.
Okay.
But if you introduce another access point, you would run it off of a different channel. And then it wouldn't interfere.
Okay, makes sense.
So many of you may be looking at this and say, okay, 802.11b, why would they go down in speed? We already were at 54. Why would we go down? Well, these technologies, one, were developed by different companies. And the A, B, C rating and stuff like that was based upon when the patents and stuff were submitted to the IEEE. So these patents came in close to the same time, but by different companies. But A was first to the IEEE. However, B was first to market. So they got first to the general public and became one of the more widely adopted of the Bluetooth over A. What you need to remember, though, is for A, 54 megabits per second, 5 gigahertz bandwidth. So you need to remember that. B, 11 megabits per second, 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth. The 802.11 standards was one of those things that I wrote down my lists that I did every day. This was one of the ones that I did every day. Because there will be multiple questions with regards to the wireless standards on the test. 802.11g. They finally caught up to 802.11a. So gets the speeds back up to 54 megabits per second, operates off of the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth, just like B, and it offered backwards compatibility. So G devices would work on B, or G networks would work with B devices. So if you had those really expensive Bluetooth headsets when they first came out, you could still use it on an 802.11g network. So it was backwards compatible with the 802.11b devices. Now, slight problem. If you had an 802.11g network and you introduced an 802.11b device, it would slow the entire network down so that it could communicate with that device. So the entire network would slow down to 802.11b standards. So some people were upgrading to 802.11g and wondering why they weren't getting the speeds. But because 802.11b devices were on that network, it was slowing everything down because they can't talk at different speeds. Everybody's going to talk at the same speed, right? So that's what would happen with the 802.11g. Questions so far?
I got a question. So how, like, we talking about devices. So how would you know which like device like go with which like you know, A, B, and G? Like you saying you introduce a device to that to that network, but how would you know that, you know, like it's not compatible, like thing like that?
Well, as IT professionals, what do we always have to do with regards to our devices? What are we always recommended to do? When you get a new device, what's the first thing you
Read the
should do?
documentation.
Read the documentation. The documentation will tell you what kind of device it is. And even if you go and start looking up Bluetooth headsets and stuff like that on Amazon, it'll tell you a lot of times in the description what standard it operates off of. It'll say it's an A, B, G device, AC, N. So a lot of times, even if you're looking at it, it will tell you in the description what kind of device it is.
Okay.
And if they don't, you'll quickly find it in the comments because people will be like, I bought this thinking it was a AC standard, but no, it was only a B. So, you know, you'll see a lot of times in the comments, people will complain if it's not mentioned in the description. All right, 802.11n. N is in Nancy. Revolutionized it. By now, in the same device, we can operate on the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz bandwidth, or both simultaneously. It's also backwards compatible with previous generations. It was able to get much better throughput through the use of this new revolutionary technology that you absolutely need to know, MIMO, which is multiple input, multiple output. And it started utilizing multiple antennas for transmission and reception. You'll probably remember this era as the routers that looked like the little spider upside down, had a whole bunch of antennas sticking up out of it. So you started seeing that. That was at least, at minimum, an 802.11n standard. So it operated on both bandwidths. It introduced MIMO. It was able to use what's called channel bonding. And that was typically in the 5 gigahertz bandwidth, which allowed you to get much better throughput than if you used a single band. And it had speed ratings getting up there in the 130 to 150 megabits per second, which is pretty respectable.
So for the N, it would basically regulate whatever you put device you added to it to either send those that's compatible to 2.4 and that's compatible to the 5s. Like it'll just like do that by itself, kind of.
Well, it could, or you can intentionally selected to be a 2.4 or 5.
Okay.
But if it came in as a 5 only, then it would link to the 5 channel. If it came in as a 2.4 only, it would link to the 2.4 channel. All right. 802.11 AC. 5 gigahertz only technology. Nice thing is it can utilize wider channels and could bond up to 8 channels together. So I think there's like, what, is it 45 channels in the 5 gigahertz bandwidth? Look that one up. Also employed MIMO, multiple in, multiple out, aiding in the process. Oh, so apparently it has up to 233, but with channel bonding, it gets it down to 45. All right. So with this, 5 gigahertz only, 1 gigabit per second range. Still uses the MIMO, though MIMO was introduced in and can bond up to 8 channels. Main takeaway from that. Questions so far? So A, B, G, in, and AC. We have a nice graphic, I believe, at the end of this slide that puts them all on the same page and lays out all the information you need to know. It's really good. So we'll get to that one here in a bit. All right. Moving on beyond the 802.11, we will get into other characteristics of wireless network models. One is called ad hoc mode, which is also called peer-to-peer wireless networking. That would be me communicating, or my computer communicating with another computer without the need of using a wireless node like a router or a hotspot or something like that. So it would allow for direct communication between me and another computer through wireless standards. It's great for small groups, transferring some files, printers, things like that. It's usually utilizing Bluetooth, which means the transfer speeds are going to be a little bit lower. But for short bursts and for transmitting small pieces of information, documents, files, things like that, it's usually not that bad. However, for security reasons, if you're not using ad hoc mode, you need to make sure it is turned off, because people can connect through your computer in ad hoc mode and utilize your credentials in your internal networks. This is a form of attack that some hackers can use. So if you are not actively using it, make sure it is turned off. All right, infrastructure mode. So networks that are utilizing more than one WAP or wireless access point to connect to wireless nodes to a wired network segment. So it is typically used for networks that need to share dedicated resource such as internet connections. So infrastructure mode, you'll typically have a bunch of access points, and then you'd have a primary one that everything will communicate through. When you update your SSID and passwords, it spreads out through the rest of the network. So if you're setting up wireless mesh settings, that is one way to do it. All right. Now we want to talk about encryption. You want to give me a brief description of what encryption means? What do we mean when we say that word? We go with Bernard just because of his background.
I don't know what you mean by the background, but encryption, basically just, to me, is basically just, I say like hiding or coding. You know what I'm saying? When you encrypt something, you code it in a certain way. Or should I say?
Okay. So it's kind of obscuring the data, so it's hard to make out what it is.
Yes, sir.
Okay, like it. So we had to figure out how to do this wirelessly because we didn't want, whenever we were communicating wirelessly, we don't want everybody to just kind of see what we're transmitting, right? So we had to figure out a way to kind of obscure that data to, you know, protect it and make it a little bit safer to do things like shop on Amazon or transmit files, things like that. So one of the first renditions that they came out with publicly, or you know, to the public sector, was WEP, or Wired Equivalent Privacy. This was configured with a static, which means it never changes, 40 or 104-bit WEP key. If you want to communicate with that device, you have to be configured with the identical key in order to communicate so that the standard can be encrypted. Unfortunately, this is a fully cracked security protocol. Any basic hacker can rip through this standard in about 2 to 3 minutes. That's not to say you should never use it. If it's the only option you have, it's still better than nothing. But it is a thoroughly cracked standard, 2 to 3 minutes. Most hackers can pull right through it. And it's because of the nature of the static keys that are never changed, it is its main weakness. So it makes it easy as data is transmitted for them to figure out what's going on, break down the key, and then they basically can see everything at that point. So hopefully one that you don't have to use, but still better than nothing. Now we get into the next evolution of it, which was Wi-Fi protected access, which is WPA. This allows for a dynamic encryption key as opposed to the static encryption key, which is what we were using before. This one is dynamic. A new key is generated for every single packet that is sent. And it requires the user to authenticate before what they do is called a key exchange, which is utilizing what's called public and private keys. Think of it like a lockbox where you would use one key to lock it and then the other key to unlock it. You can't reverse that. So you would lock something with a private key, which is the key you have for your computer. Nobody else has that key. But you would share the public key with the person you're communicating with, and they would use the public key to unlock that box and open it up and see what the message is. And then when they would send a message to you, they would lock it with their private key. And then when you would get it, they would share their public key with you, and you would use their public key to unlock the box and open up and see. So they do what's called a key exchange. And they would use a technology called TKIP, which uses a temporal key integrity protocol. And that is what's enhancing the encryption itself. So WPA uses TKIP. And the keys are essentially given at that point an integrity check to make sure they were not modified or tampered with in transit. But this was not a fail-safe system. It still had its issues. This was kind of a bridging technology to get us to what is more commonly used today, which is WPA2, or Wi-Fi Protected Access 2. This uses a far more advanced standard, which is AES, Advanced Encryption Standard. And this uses a 128-bit block cipher, which is significantly harder to crack than the dynamic key exchange previously used. So whenever you have the option of the three, this is the one you always pick, WPA2. Now, companies may utilize a centralized server to authenticate users to make sure that whoever's on there, if you're using enterprise mode, if they're on there, they're allowed to be on there. One of the most common ones they use is called Kerberos. I think the military uses one called TACAX. But that would be like a central authenticating server that would verify you're allowed to be there, you're allowed to talk on that network before it would grant you access. So when you're configuring the access, you know, when configuring a password or utilizing pre-shared keys, which is PSK, it stands for pre-shared keys. Instead of a centralized server, it is referred to as personal mode. So with an organization, you would use an authentication server for your company in enterprise mode. On a personal level, like at your house, you would use a password or pre-shared keys, the key exchange we just talked about. Currently, at the time of this, it was the most advanced or strongest encryption for Wi-Fi that you could use. Any questions with regards to this? Main takeaways, so we can go back. WEP uses a static key, very unsecure. WPA improves upon this using TKIP technology, Temporal Key Integrated Protocol, TKIP for WPA. That's the main things you want to associate here. Slightly better than WEP, utilizes TKIP. WPA2 utilizes AES. Or Advanced Encryption Standard. Most modern and secure form today. Or as of the 1002 or 1001. Questions so far? All right.
Not a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Golly, and then we'll get to Greg.
Yeah, so like I do see like when you try to set up those Wi-Fi network and stuff, like those do come up, but it's like why do they give you the option of using one or the other and they just don't like all operate on the you know the most, I mean the best one, the WPA2?
Some of the devices you have may be older and not able to operate on those encrypting standards. If you make that the requirement, they cannot use the network. So depending on the technology you're using or the devices you have, you may not be able to utilize the more up-to-date standards.
Okay. And then that's something you gotta like you can go in your settings and everything and like change and it is not like already come up. Okay. All right, thank you.
You are absolutely correct. Sometimes you'll see in there where it says WPA or yeah, there's a WPA with AES and it's not WPA2. That's still WPA2.
Okay, Because I was about sometimes I do see that too, but I was just gonna ask another time.
So here's a good slide for the review of all the standards. If you want to go and take a picture of this, I think we have another one that's a little more simplified than this at the end, but this one kind of breaks it down pretty good for study. If you want to take a quick screenshot.
Hear me? Anybody can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Greg. What's up?
Okay, no, yeah, I was gonna ask a question. Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so I'm trying to retrofit some of this stuff into some experiences. So in enterprise mode with the server, are we talking about a token? Because I'm trying to figure out.
Well, if you remember, what was it? Kerberos uses, what was it? Ticket granting tickets. I think TACAX would use, you could use tokens, if I'm not mistaken.
So, well, I'm trying to make sure I understand this for the test itself. This enterprise mode is not specifically talking about your a token bits. What exactly is happening in enterprise mode that's different from personal mode? That's what I'm.
Well, you're looking for more robust gatekeeping, essentially.
Yeah, but what's different on the user side, on the server side? I want to make sure I understand that, because I feel like it would be a token of some sort, or some other randomized, like maybe like maybe like an extra step of authentication, like an email or something.
Well, you may see like a multi-factor form of authentication.
Yeah.
And one of those factors could be a token, either a hardware or software token. So it depends on who you're using, or what your company puts into place. But yeah, they may utilize that multi-factor authentication, which we will get into, so don't worry about that.
Okay, so make sure that's what they mean by enterprise.
Yeah, but on the, they may say, what is a example of an authentication server? And that would be something like Kerberos or TACAX are the ones they like to use.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, where you're starting to get into, you're starting to push into Network Plus territory, which is going to get a little beyond the scope of the A+.
Gotcha, I understand.
So, any other questions?
Thank you, appreciate
it. All right. All right, before we dive into the role of the router, let's take a quick 5-6 minute brain break. Rebecca about her adorable study partner with her. All right, so we'll come back at 11:25. Let me go ahead and. All right, so routers. We talked about network devices before when we were talking about layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, all that kind of fun stuff. We were getting an introduction to networking. And then yesterday, we started talking a little bit more in depth about the OSI layers. We have 7 of them. And so you kind of start to get a little bit, put a couple more pieces of the puzzle in place. Routers operate on that 3rd layer. Now we're talking about basic routers. You may hear a mention of what's called a 7-layer router. Don't necessarily need to worry about that with regards to A+. They're sticking with regards to the basic router, which is a layer 3 device. The other thing you may hear mentioned is a layer 3 switch, when a switch is typically a layer 2 device. The primary role of the router is to essentially facilitate communication between networks by controlling the flow of the data. Utilizes IP addresses to, kind of know where it needs to send stuff, whether it be another subnetwork in your organization, whether it needs to go out to the internet and communicate with someone else. The router is going to make these decisions based upon routing tables. So how will it forward stuff? It will do this based upon routing tables, because when you plug in a router, it's going to communicate with any other routers that are directly connected to it and know, see their routing table so that they know who they would share with. So when it receives a packet, like if DW sends something to me and I look at it and I know it's for Avery, but he doesn't know how to get to Avery, but he knows I do. So he sends the packet to me and then I forward it on to Avery. The other nice thing routers do is they kind of allow you to share single connections. Remember, we were talking about NAT, or network address translation, where you have multiple IP addresses inside. And then when they go into the router will change that IP to the outside, the public address. And so everybody can kind of share that connection. So same thing here. It allows you to share the connection with the outside. And routers are used extensively on the internet. Basically, the majority of the internet is just a network of routers allowing us to shuffle packets around. And they do have both wired and wireless models available. Also, they have personal versus enterprise. The one you have in your house, this is an older one, but it may look something similar to this, where you have the multiple antennas sticking up, smaller box, versus an enterprise level router, which is this much more robust piece of equipment that would go into a server rack and would lock in there. So typically you would not see this in a home environment, although I wouldn't put it past some enthusiasts to install one, Greg. But typically you would have stuff like this in your house.
That was smooth. That was smooth.
All right. So other pieces of equipment we need to be aware of. So we have our routers here, which we know route our traffic, all that fun stuff. Well, we also have wireless access points that we would use that aren't necessarily routers. In our house, we may have the router device that you just saw, and that also is a wireless access point. It also is a switch. It also is a router. So it's kind of an all-in-one device, what we utilize in our houses from our ISPs. On an enterprise level, you typically are not going to see stuff like that. You'll have something like this routing your traffic as it comes in, and then you would have basically a wireless access point, and that's what it does. It is just a wireless access point. You may have seen some of these in the ceilings in office buildings, hospitals, whenever you go to schools, stuff like that. When you go into these larger buildings, you'll see something like this, and it's mounted in the ceiling, and you'll see them every so often in the building. And what they are is essentially just a wireless access point. So it allows you to connect to their network wirelessly, and then it essentially works like a bridge, converting that wireless signal to a signal that would go over the LAN, or the wired network. Now, installing these things, especially for spacing them out throughout the ceilings, can be a bit of a pain, especially if you might have to run power to every one of these devices. Could you imagine running like a plug for every single wireless access point that you have to install in the ceiling? That's a lot of extra work. You got to bring in extra contractors. It's a lot. So we've kind of found a way to get around this a little bit. It's copper wires. What are all the wires in our house that run electricity? Copper wires, right? Why can't we use them as a multi-purpose tool? So somebody figured out to push power over an Ethernet cable. So you can kind of use an Ethernet cable to also deliver power to your wireless access points, to hubs or switches you may have in the ceiling, things like that. So you don't have to run power to every single device. So they will have what's called a PoE injector, which pushes that 110 power across the internet lines, or the Ethernet lines. So all you have to run is network cables for each WAP, and not power as well. cuts down the work, the required contractors you may need, things like that, helps speed the process up. The other side of this, which is kind of the inversion of this, what if you live in an apartment building with concrete walls and it just does not do good with wireless signals? No matter what you do, no matter where you put your router, it only works so good in maybe a couple rooms. And you want to extend it, or if it's on a different floor, if you live in a house, it's a multi-floor house. How do I get the internet up there without, buying another really expensive piece of equipment? Well, they have a way to run it where, like we just said, we have the power lines in our house are copper too, right? So there's a way we can actually run data over the existing power lines in our house. So they have something that is called Ethernet over power, or EOP. Another thing they might call it is power line. That's actually something I utilize at my house right now because the Wi-Fi signal doesn't travel very good. I have a long house. The wireless signal doesn't travel very good through it. So I run Ethernet over power to get to my office, and it works beautifully. It's come a long way in the last few years. Just gets a little dodgy if you have to go through a breaker. So wireless access points, running power over our Ethernet, and then we also have the ability to run Ethernet over our power lines already pre-existing. Great for people in apartments because it gives you almost the robustness of a hardline connection. So much better than you would get for Wi-Fi, but you don't have to run the wires. All right, SOHO router, small home or small office, home office router. Like we talked about earlier, it is a multi-function router. Yes, Golly.
Yeah, from the last slides, the power over Ethernet, is that like the same, like do they use the same I guess like the same wire for the Ethernet over power? Like you'll only have like one like I guess plug-in thing and it does both of them, or is it like you would have to have two
for
different
Ethernet over power, you would literally plug the device into any wall outlet, and then you would plug an Ethernet cable into it, and it would run that to the other end where you would have it plugged in and then wired to your router.
Okay.
And so when it'll take that signal and then translate it over the data, like over your power lines, and run it through your power lines to the other plug, and then transmit it to the data for your computer.
Okay. So then I'm trying to understand it. So it would have the same, so you only need like one of them, right?
No, you need two. You need one on each end.
Oh.
So
you're injecting.
Go ahead.
Can I get a shot? Okay, yeah. So what are you doing? All right, so your high voltage electricity that runs through your house, you're utilizing the low voltage portion of it, the frequency and the low voltage side that electricity doesn't bother that side, right? So you're injecting your internet into that section, right? So you have an input section, and then now wherever you want to have internet, you're taking it, you're plugging another one into that outlet, and then getting your output on that side. So it's basically a way to run. It's like a virtual wire. You're doing a virtual Ethernet cable, technically, utilizing high voltage wire.
So that's what I'm saying for the outlet part. Like, okay, so I get there's like an input and output, but that's what I'm saying. So on to that input and output, you can run both power over internet and Ethernet over power. Is that like vice versa?
No. Well, power over internet, Ethernet would be you taking your Ethernet lines and running so your data lines that you would use for your network, and then running power over that. Okay. This is Ethernet over power, where you would just plug it into a wall outlet like this, and then you literally plug an Ethernet cable into the device,
What's your computer?
And then it runs the data over your existing power lines you have in your house.
Okay.
That's one bit. And then there are devices now, to talk about the PoE portion, there are devices that require power to operate, right? Like a camera or WAPs in the ceiling. That's what I have in my house right now. And those devices that require power, like a power injector, you basically put all of them inside of that Ethernet cable, right? The power and the data inside the Ethernet cable, and send those to those locations. So it's a different technology. One, we're utilizing the existing power that comes in from your power company and then runs through your house. And the next is utilizing the Ethernet cable that you're going to run for your data line drops. We're going to put power into that cable to get you your devices powered up. Two different bits. Yeah.
And it's funny, Kelly, I bought one. The picture just showed me, like, I bought one of those not knowing what it was like supposed to do. Well, I thought it was supposed to be like a wireless booster. So now I know that why it wasn't working.
Yeah, you have to have both of them plugged in. Like what your router would go into one, and then the other would go into the device that you need. So for certain devices in my house, I'd rather run it, like for my gaming system, I have it run through EOP because it's almost as good as a hard line, whereas you get some latency and bandwidth issues with regards to Wi-Fi.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Greg and Kelly.
No problem. All right. So your small office, home office router, usually that's the one you would have in your house. It is a multi-function device, kind of an all-in-one, like we talked about earlier, where it's everything. It is your router, it is your switch, it is your gateway, it is your bridge, because it bridges from your wired to wireless. It is your DHCP server. It hands out IP addresses to all the computers or network devices in your house, because you're not manually going in and put that stuff in, are you? No. So we need a DHCP server to do that. Our router in our house does that automatically for us. So, it takes care of all the stuff so that we don't have to. It's also a wireless access point so that we can, just plug and play. It comes in, they put it in, they turn it on all the nice little functions for it, and they walk away. It's an amazing thing. It also does network address translation. It does. It is a basic firewall that we can actually configure and set it up. So it's kind of everything in one little nice little package. So configuring your router. Don't need to get too fancy on this. Basically, on your configurations, you have your basic configurations, which are like your channels. That's that 1, 6, and 11 we talked about. On your 2.4 or your 5 gigahertz, you can go in and adjust that if you need to. But typically, this stuff is either preset by your ISP or it has an auto sensing that it will do. NAT, network address translation. We already talked about that. That is done, and you can configure those settings yourself. Universal plug and pray. And there's other stuff that you'll typically see on there, firewalls, and then quality of service. Quality of service is important because what this does is it knows not all information traveling over your network needs to be treated equally. So this is where quality of service comes in. Should an email that you're sending be treated with the same level of urgency as a video conference you're on?
No.
No. Because the email can, if it gets delayed a couple seconds, it doesn't matter, does it? If you're on a video conference and you're getting delayed a couple seconds because of lack of bandwidth, that does cause a problem, doesn't it? Yep. So this is what quality of service attempts to solve. So it takes different types of data, treats them differently, and gives them like priority status with regards to how much bandwidth they can take versus like top priority all the way down to like best effort. So that is what QoS or quality of service means. It's managing the flow of your network traffic. All right, quick steps for installing a SOHO router. I know it seems kind of funny, but this is what we do. Locate the router in the centrally located, spot in the office or home. Connect it to an AC power device. Connect your network cables if needed. Although we know mostly today they are, people tend to operate off of wireless. Some people still do use wire technologies, just because the signals are a little more robust. Start up your PC, you connect to the router using a browser per the manufacturer's instructions. One easy way to do this and figure out how to connect to your router is you go into your command line, you do your IP config /all. When you see your gateway IP address, if you go into your web address up here and you put in your gateway's IP address, you will log into your router. And then you would configure your settings from there, and you can update your firmware. If you have never logged into your router, you have homework tonight.
I definitely do.
You need to log into your router, if only because your router is likely wide open for anybody who comes by. Because it is likely utilizing the generic sign-in and password, which if you want to know how hard it is to figure that out, it takes a quick Google search based on the type of router you have. If you're with Comcast, it's usually admin, and then it's password. So admin is your sign-in and password is your password. So you got to go in, change your username and password for your router so everybody who comes by is not able to hook up to your router. Verify your security settings. Make sure you're using the best you can, which would likely be WPA2. And hopefully,
and if I mess it up and my internet stopped working, can I log in?
If you press, I believe if you press and hold the power button for like 30 seconds, you'll actually recycle the router and it will go back to all default settings.
What about, how do you get the, what did you call it? The gateway, is that on my router?
What, the gateway? No. Okay, so on your start button on your computer, when you click start, you remember how we get to the command line? You've had to do it a couple times in Coursera.
Yeah.
So you go and you type in CMD and then it brings up your command line.
Uh-huh.
When you get there, you're going to type in that IP config. Here, I'll type it in here. You're going to type in that command. Oh, excuse me. That was the Mac one.
No, that's perfect. I have a Mac.
Okay. So why does it keep changing it to IF?
I had to config the shiznit out of my router.
Yeah, so you need to do that if you have not done that. So you go to IF config or IP config, depending on what type of system you have, /all, and then you're going to look for your gateway IP address. It's going to give you an IP address, and that's going to be the IP address for your router. And then you'll plug it in your web address, and it will take you to your router so you can sign in. And that's where you would configure your router settings.
Does it say, oh, okay, I see. It would say something like default gateway?
Yes, that is your router address.
I knew somebody was on my thing, man. I just knew.
So that's everybody's homework tonight. It's to log into their router, change the SSID and password, so we can at least get a bare level of security on our home networks.
Why does it like the service providers like already like kind of give you that instruction when they set up your routers and stuff for you at your house and like, you know, like they don't even give you like a notice like, oh, you can do this or
Hey,
this is how you do this.
here's a dirty little secret about the cable industry. They're paid by the jobs they do, not how long they are there.
Well, they're not doing
So
a good job.
if they're
then.
paid to install a service, the faster they can get that service installed and move on, they get paid the same. If they have to be there for 5 hours because of problems, because they have to snake wires through the walls, all that stuff, they still get paid the same if they're there only 30 minutes.
Wow.
So yeah, the motivation is not to make sure you have the most secure setup. The motivation is to get you up and running, and then if you need something, you can Google it later.
I'm gonna set up a company with the service provider, but as IT techs to actually come in and help people do those.
There is likely a market for that.
Because seriously, because there's a lot of things people don't know, and you just come in and somebody set it up and leave, and you don't even know I have a password on my router. I didn't know that. Like, I thought this was secure.
Well, and here's the thing: is most people think the SSID and password for their Wi-Fi, which is what we're talking about here, is the same as the SSID and password for their router. They are not the same thing. No, those are not the same things.
People.
So if you have Comcast and they have that fun little app that you can go on and log into your router and change your SSID password and all that fun stuff, that's tip of the iceberg. That does not affect the sign-in and passwords for your router or the security settings on your router. That is totally different. So those are two different things. So if you think you're going to be logging in on your phone and I had the Comcast app at Xfinity, I can go in and do no. Get on a web browser, log into your router, utilizing your default gateway IP address as the web address. Typically from there, you can change your SSID for your wireless, your Wi-Fi. That is called your network name. It's important to change this from the default because here's the thing is, another thing is based off of the default name your network is given, people who are doing what's called war driving, which is not a common thing nowadays, but it used to be, based off of your network name, if it's a generic one, they know exactly what service you're using. So they instantly know what kind of router you have and what the default admin and password is, and they can get in. So that's why it's important to rename your networks. Something where you can kind of identify yourself or whatever. And if you want to mess with people if you're in a dense, population area, if you have like a restaurant downstairs, like or a Starbucks, rename your network like Starbucks to, just so people won't necessarily know it's yours. But yeah, you want to make sure it's something that that identifies your network to yourself. So make sure you please change that. You have the option to broadcast or not broadcast your SSID. So, when you go log into your phone and you're looking for all available networks and stuff like that, those are ones that are broadcasted. The wireless access point is kind of sending out a signal. Here's what I'm called. Here's who I am. You can opt to not broadcast if you wish. They call this a security measure. It's not really, because if you have a Wi-Fi analyzer, you can quickly figure this out, and you can download free Wi-Fi analyzers onto your phone. But for the purposes of A+, they consider this a security measure. And so if it's not broadcasting, then you need to have the exact SSID and password in your phone so it can connect to it even though it's not broadcasting. Yes, Golly.
So if it's not broadcasting, like, and I guess somebody comes to your house and want to connect to it, so you have to give them the SSID. You would
have to give them the SSID and password, although they're getting around that now, which is kind of nice, where they they say you want to hook a guest up to your network and it gives you a QR code and they can scan the QR code and it gives them the SSID and password.
Oh, so that's what I was gonna say. So then, like, if you do have that, and then you make a guest network, so would the guest network be like broadcast so that they can just see the guest network and not your like private, like I guess the
Depends
private
on
one?
how you have it configured, honestly.
Okay. Because I know, like you said before, like, you know, if you, like, people can hop back onto other people's, like, let's say somebody's already hacked and then they come to your home and then that person get into your network, then obviously the hacker also get onto like, you know, everybody's network. So
Well,
that's
I
what I
mean,
was saying.
well-
Like, so if you set up a guest one, does that like kind of block that out?
That is onto something though, because that's how I have mine. It's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, that's exactly how I have mine, Gary. Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I
I'm
have
just
a-
trying to have some common sense.
Yeah, my network is hidden. My internal network is hidden, but you know, if you come to my house, you see the public one.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
But again, it usually comes down to how you have it configured. So, but yes, you can do it.
I'm gonna get with you, Greg. We're gonna need a session where you're gonna help me with all that.
Yeah, we can do it, man. We can do it for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly.
No problem. All right. So we come back to the channels where you can go into your router and you can select your channels. If you're on the 2.4, 1, 6, and 11 are your main ones to avoid interference. And that is obviously in the US. The channel itself is only made on that particular router. And then most of them, like we talked about earlier, can automatically decide which channel to use currently, but things can change. Like you can have a neighbor move in and use the same channel as you are. But for the most part, they can auto select. So another security measure that is technically a security measure, but again, it's one of those ones that's easily bypassable. You can do something on your routers called MAC filtering. So remember how we talked about yesterday that, or last Thursday, that every single device, every network device, the network card has its own MAC address, right? So you have the 6 sets of, 2 characters, first 3 for the manufacturer, second 3 are for the device itself. Well, on your network, you can actually create a selection and say, if you only have a few devices, I only want devices with this list of MAC addresses to be allowed to access my network. So you can just say specifically, only X devices are allowed based off of the MAC addresses they use. If you have a bunch of devices, this is not optimal. If you only have a few, it's okay. But the thing is you can spoof a MAC address very easily. All you have to do is spin up a virtual machine and you can manually put in a MAC address to the virtual NIC on that machine, which will grant you access to the network. So again, it's one of those things that technically is considered a security measure, though in real life, not really. But for the purposes of A+, this is considered a security feature. So let's cross that out right there. So while a security tool, not a great security tool, while a security tool, it is not efficient with large amount of users. All right, any questions so far? Yep, there you go, Oscar. You can change it in Windows as well. So it is an easy one to bypass.
Some phones even allow you to do it too. Like I
Yep.
have one, yeah, old phone that just, you can
Okay.
either like do the spoofing like automatically, or you can actually choose the one you want.
There you go. So again, in theory, it is a security measure. In reality, it's easy to bypass. All right, next, WPS. If you have this turned on, please turn it off. I know it seems like it's convenient, but this is like leaving your back door wide open. It allows new devices, this is the WPS window Wi-Fi protected setup. It allows new devices to join the network by pressing a button, which you've probably had to do this before on a printer or something like that. And even many routers have it today where you just kind of press the button and it allows you to automatically just connect to that device, instead of having to enter the complicated passphrase and all that kind of fun stuff. It is supposedly to simplify the security configuration of SOHO routers, and it only works on WPA or WPA2, does not work on WEP. Here's the problem. This is a fully cracked encryption method. And even, you know how they say you have to press the button to initiate it so that you can log on? No, you don't. You actually can initiate the process from another device. This is a bad thing to have turned on. So while you're in there on your router tonight, setting up your SSID and password, please go in and turn off WPS. And then when asked by anybody why you did that, because I value security. So yes, please, please, please turn off WPS. All right. The DMZ returns. So DMZ, short for demilitarized zone. This is an area where you can connect to public servers that can be accessed from the outside of the network. However, it keeps things internal protected a little bit more. Essentially, you're creating, so you have like a firewall here. Here's the horrible drawing of a cloud, represent the internet. And then you would actually have kind of like a firewall in here. So in here, you may have web servers, email. And then you would have second firewall, and in here, you would have stuff like R&D, HR, accounting, don't worry, my drawings get worse as I go. All right, so you essentially have two firewalls. You would have a lesser one here because you would want people from the outside, if you're running a business, to come in, or salesmen or what have you who are not necessarily on site, come in and be able to check their emails, be able to come in and look at your web servers or what have you. But even though you're allowing them access to this, you'd have a much more robust firewall here that would protect stuff like your accounting, your HR documentation, your research and development, all that really important stuff that's proprietary to your business. You want all that stuff really secure, but maybe your customers need to have some minimal access or outside salespeople, stuff like that. So this area between the two firewalls is called the DMZ. So in here, it is visible to the external world in the DMZ, but those coming from outside cannot reach past this firewall to get to your more secure information. Almost all the web servers you access, like when you go to Google, Amazon, all that stuff, you're operating on servers that are inside their DMZ. Questions so far? This is kind of a similar present or premises to what you'll have at home. And they do let you have options like where you can take specific devices and put them in the DMZ. So you'll see that as an option on your router. All right. Other thing you can set up if you wish, you have your DHCP, NAT, QoS, and universal plug and play, as we talked about earlier. As with anything on your routers and stuff, anything when you're playing with it, if you see something and you don't know what it means or you don't know what it does, leave it be for now. Only mess with things if you know what it is, or turn things off if you know what they are. All right. Extra security that we can put on our network. You can do what is called port filtering or port forwarding. So remember we said there's 65,000 ports on a computer, right? That we can access through networks. Well, you may not want them to access all those ports. So what you can do is you can actually turn on or turn off specific ports. Like if we're only doing web hosting, we may only open HTTP and HTTPS. That may be the only ones we turn on. The rest can be turned off because we do not want them to have any kind of access because they can get in through open ports. In fact, one of the first things attackers will do on many occasions is start pinging specific, based off specific ports to see what they might be able to get access to on a system. I'll do a port scan. And then you have something called port forwarding, where one example maybe, or that I've heard that was pretty good, was you could take a security camera. Not trying to increase people's paranoia, but if you have a security service like Blink or the Amazon one, with the Ring security cameras and all that stuff, all that is stored on web servers. So that's stored on somebody else's systems, which means they have access to it. You may not like that. So you might be able to set up your own security camera that only you would have access to. So you could set the recordings to record on your home computers or your home devices, but maybe you travel for business and you want to be able to go home and look and see what's on your security cameras. Typically, a security camera will have a port to connect to it being port 80, which is your HTTP port, right? Real common port for web service. You don't necessarily want to have just that port open. So what you can do is you can close that port, port 80, and you can set it to something random. So you could sit there and say, when I want to log in, my security camera would be on port, 43250. So when I log into my home IP, do the colon, and I add that port, my router sees it come in on that port, and then it would forward that communication to the specific device that I've designated, which would be my security camera, and communicate with it on port 80, which is how it is set up to receive traffic. So that is what port forwarding is. So I can take a device internally and have it, if I communicate with a specific port externally, it will automatically go to that device. Does this make sense?
Can you like re-explain that, like in term, like when you're using the camera? Like I'm kind of a little confused.
Okay, so I bought this really awesome fancy camera. And the way the manufacturer tells me, if it is a internet network camera. So how I would need to talk to it is I would need to come to it and communicate with it on port 80, which is the web server port, right?
Right.
Now, for security for my house, I have port 80 turned off because that's going to be one of the first ports, if somebody's doing a port scan, that they're going to try to hit. So that's the most common port that a hacker is going to try to hit is port 80. So I turn that off. But if I'm away from the house, I still want to be able to view my security cameras and make sure my house is okay, right? So what I can do is that on my firewall, I can set up a rule to forward. So I can have 43,250 go to the camera on port 80. So when I hit the IP to my house, which could be 10.10.5.1, and then I'll do the double colon 43, or the colon, excuse me, 3,250. So I type in my home web address, and then as soon as my router sees that 43,250, it forwards it to that camera that I have designated and on the correct port that it needs to communicate on.
Oh, okay. Okay. So is that like so then like you said before, like if you like those other companies that have those cameras and like their data is registering to them, so like all that data will be coming to you? Like is that like related to like that?
Yeah, I could like if I bought cameras and I only want me and my family to have access to it, this would be a way that I could access it from outside my house. Versus having something like Blink where I go to an app on my phone and I can see all the cameras in my house.
Okay. So then like would this also bypass like I guess like in a way, like like how those some other scammers just like, okay, you gotta get a subscription to the cloud to like view your like I guess like your recording.
Yes, because you wouldn't be buying it through them, you would just be buying the camera.
Okay. So you would have like access to the all those recording without getting a subscription and stuff like that?
Yeah, you would record it at your house. And you would like have your own server set up when you record them yourself rather than all the data being stored somewhere else.
Oh, okay. So would you need like a server, like a data storage server, or would that just be
well,
like
I mean, it depends on how much data you wish to save. If you want to save like all the recordings for for years, yeah, you're going to need some heavy duty storage. But if you're only keeping back like a month's worth, unless something out of the ordinary happens, probably not.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool. Okay, thank you. I got it.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on port forwarding? Something else called port triggering, but we will talk about that later as well. All right, we already talked about VPN a couple times, which essentially sets up an encrypted tunnel between you and their server network, and then you can kind of come out wherever you wish, and it kind of masks your location and also does end-to-end encryption. Most of the time, you have to pay attention to what kind of encryption they're using. Some use what's called a full tunnel, which means both up and down are encrypted. Some use what's called a half tunnel to try to make it where the service is faster, but it will say encrypt up but not down. So you would only encrypt half the data you're doing. So paying attention to what kind of VPN you're using and how the encryption works is important. All right. Having issues installing your router, please refer to the documentation. Should have been provided by your internet service provider, or if you bought the router separately, like from another service and want to use it, documentation should be there. You can also look it up online if you accidentally misplaced it. I'm not going to say anybody here threw the documentation away, but you might have misplaced it in the trash can or something like that. And so you can go online and look it up and research it that way. You can use your command prompt to ping a known address to make sure things are working. Most common one people use, again, you want to ping both a web address and a web IP. So you could ping www.google.com and see if it connects there. If it can't connect there, ping 8.8.8.8, which is Google's DNS server. If you can ping based off of the IP, but not the web address, you likely have a problem with your DNS server. So pings tell us a lot with regards to what could be wrong with the system. Make sure your Ethernet is cabled, and you're getting connected, and you're getting some activity lights. Always remember, cables have two sides. Please verify both are plugged in. IP config /all to verify your settings. And then you can go into your properties box, verify your TCP/IP settings. Sometimes it's something as simple as you have, or somebody has clicked the device to be on a static IP connection, which may not work for your current network. It may have worked where you were, like at your office, but not at your house. And you would need to switch it over to dynamic so that it can receive a IP address from the DHCP server on your router. If it's static, you want to do static ones at your house because you can do IP filtering as well. Make sure you put in the IP, subnet mask, default gateway, and DNS server. You have all that information so you can put it in. Questions so far? All right, can't connect. Make sure your drivers on your network interface card are up to date. Where would we go to update our drivers for hardware?
Device manager.
Device manager. Very good. If it has no errors, go to your network and sharing center. You'll see a red X on the one that there might be a problem. Click Start Windows Diagnostics and Troubleshooting Program. And likely you will see, where is it here? Background and filters. Nope. There we go. Here's the source code for the Windows diagnostic tool. Works every time. Only took them about 2 minutes to write it. Basically states that the diagnostic tool is terrible. So you can run the diagnostics tool, see if you get an answer. Likely it's going to say unable to fix issue. And you'll have to work on other troubleshooting steps beyond that. If you get a PIPA address, means likely you're not connected to your DHCP, but you can do some troubleshooting from there. What does the PIPA address start with?
$164.
Close.
169.
127?
It's 169.2, what was it? 169.254. 254. There we go. Beautiful. So 169.254. Nope. Wrong college. So if we see that in our IP address, we know we're getting a PIPA address, which means it's not able to communicate with the DHCP. We don't have an IP address, but it allows us to troubleshoot. That gives us limited connectivity, or if you have intermittent connectivity, likely means we are on a Wi-Fi and we probably need to move closer to the source or move the source to a more centralized location. When you're typically getting intermittent, that is what the issue is. These are the three big things you have to worry about with signals. We started talking about this earlier with Oscar, is reflection, where the signal bounces. You have refraction, where it partially bounces and partially gets absorbed. And you have absorption, where the signal is kind of just eaten when it goes into it. Kind of like sound signals, like when you're in a sound studio, you know, they have that foam on the walls with all the bumps on it, stuff like that, and it absorbs the sound so it doesn't echo back at you. Same thing can happen with different materials with regards to Wi-Fi signals. All right. Common issues for wireless signals: Wi-Fi adapter turned off on the computer. That is extremely common, especially if the person travels a lot. They may forget that they have turned it off, put on airplane mode or something like that. If they don't travel ever and they always leave their laptop in the same location and they only use a hard line, they may have the Wi-Fi turned off for a long period of time and not even think about it at all. And then they travel once and they can never connect to anything because they have it turned off. So always be sure to check that. Make sure your router is in a central location with minimal interference. Also, channel interference, make sure that you're on a clean channel. Another thing is SSID not being broadcast, so your device can't find it because you don't have it, the actual SSID and password saved, network saved. Entering in the wrong password is another big one, and or device is too far from the source. All right. When checking connectivity, this is a real good troubleshooting step to remember here. Ping is a powerful tool. We will talk about this when we talk about troubleshooting hardware and software. But what you're doing is you're starting as close to the device as possible and working your way out. So the first thing you do is you ping yourself. Make sure your NIC is working. If that works good, ping your router. If your router responds and everything is good, we're going to do practice on this. The router responds and everything is good. Awesome. Now ping an external source, both website and IP address. Because if you can get one on if you get a good response on an IP and not on a web address, it means your DNS is down. Another thing, make sure you're checking your physical connections. Everything is good if you're working off of wired systems. Power cycle everything to give it a chance to kind of refresh, erase its cache, its memory and stuff like that, so that you can connect with a fresh without issues, which is why the first thing IT always asks, have you tried turning it on and off again? My main problem with Comcast right now is if you have any kind of issue, before they will let you talk to a customer representative, you have to do a factory reset on your router. Which is really aggravating because like you may have a minor issue and you just need their help with it, but you would have to factory reset and reset all of your settings before they'll even let you talk to a human. All right. This was the page I was talking about earlier. Please take a screenshot of this. Breaks down all the 802.11 standards, real easy to read. Great study tool. So please, please, please take a screenshot. I agree, Oscar, but unfortunately they're my only option. Like, they are it. Unless I want to drop down to 3.4 megs a second. Then I can get somebody else. I was hopeful about 5 years ago. AT&T said they were going to be laying fiber in this neighborhood in 3 months. Still waiting. All right. Now, after all of that, we should now be able to compare and contrast internet connection types and features. Compare and contrast Wi-Fi networking standards and encryption types. Explain the role of a router. Describe the differences between a wired and wireless router. And then we got into some basic configurations and troubleshooting with our routers. What's our homework tonight?
20 jobs.
Check our router.
Figure out routers.
Figure out router.
Configure our routers. Make sure we're not using the generic sign-in and password, right? All right. Any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, revelations?